Wow. Robin, you didn't tell me I was going to have to follow Aaron. Holy smokes, that was awesome. All right, so I don't have that much. I don't have that much. Okay, sorry. That was amazing. Our topic was the legal and regulatory risks and compliance challenges. I'm Shawn Tuma. I will admit I'm an attorney, but I'm here with groups like you because I like y'all a lot better than I like lawyers. But we had at our table also a CISO for a law firm, another large law firm like ours. So our topic started off talking about our roles in the law firm. And in my particular role, we have two challenges. One is our firm's use of AI as a tool by our attorneys and by our administration and everything else. And so being part of the committee that's evaluating the legal and regulatory issues and ethical issues that we have to deal with and how we use it as attorneys. And then the second is in my practice on advising clients with how they use AI in compliance with their legal and regulatory obligations. And so we spent quite a bit of time talking about the challenges of law firms initially, because Joel and I were the big mouths at first and kept it going with that. And one of the key points that I think we always have to look at when we're talking about legal and regulatory compliance is what is the AI being used for? And how is it being used? Who's using it? What is the outcome of the processing? And more importantly, what data is being impacted? What data is being used? What data is being generated? What data is maybe used in the training versus in the coding and all of that sort of stuff, because the only way you can determine what legal and regulatory issues you're going to face are by understanding what you're doing, who's doing it, who's being impacted, and what data is being used in that process. And so that then leads to the next challenge, which we talked about, is just understanding the use of the particular tools. And fortunately at our table, we have multiple companies that are using their own AI tools, that have developed their own tools, and that enabled us to really have a good conversation about practical use cases and not just theoretical concepts, right? And so when we're talking about legal and regulatory compliance, what's the root of that? Compliance, right? Compliance with what? With laws and with regulations. So what does that mean? We have to know the sources of the laws or the regulations that we're being required to comply with. Now, in the world of AI right now, there's not a whole lot of true law out there. There's some sectorial law in different, like healthcare or financial services with regulations and things like that are coming about, but there's not a whole lot. So what do we do in that case? Number one, we have to look at our contracts, because contracts are what we call the law between the parties. When you have binding contractual obligations that say, I use AI in this part of my business, or I'm prohibited from using it, or I will not disclose proprietary data in an LLM or things like that, that is absolute binding law. So when we start our compliance process, we have to start by knowing what our legal obligations are. And our contracts are probably our primary source right now for how we work and operate in the world of AI. Stepping from that, then we start looking at what's really important in this most of the time, which is the data. And since we don't have a lot of law on AI data, processing in particular, we resort to basic principles of data security. we have a whole lot of law on data security and a whole lot of principles and guidance. And so looking to those sources of what we know, privacy, security, governance, all of those things are really what we need to be pulling from in how we go about this process. And then we get to the human, right? My favorite meme, many of you may have seen it, is that boxing ring where on one side you have all of the security tools and the CISO and all this other stuff, and on the other side you have Dave, the human, right, in the battle. And Dave wins every time because humans will always screw up everything we try to put into place. And that leads to a point that we came up with about the need for education and training. And you can have all the best policies and procedures and governance and structure in the world, but it's kind of like being a parent, right? We may have the most brilliant children in the world, but if we don't teach them and train them, all of that stuff is for nothing because they're not going to just learn this stuff by osmosis, right? So we need to educate and train on these policies and procedures. And then someone took that children analogy to the next level when they said, and not only do we need to train them initially, like when we're raising them, but we need to keep educating them because once they go out into the world, they're going to start learning from other data sources, from other children, or from other information that's being put into these LLMs that's now maybe redirecting them and having them generate false information. So we have to stay on that modeling and training and observing. And so really what we see is this comes down to a process that we have to engage in. We can't just stop once we like put it into place. And so that was a part of our discussion, the need for the training, the need for confidentiality, which really brought up a point that I hadn't thought about previously. And that is when we're talking about the confidentiality and not putting proprietary or sensitive data into an LLM, we're usually thinking of it getting disclosed publicly. But in many organizations, like some of those at my table, you have highly sophisticated business organizations that have different aspects of the organization that have needs to know certain data that others don't have. And so we're not just talking about maybe having one proprietary tool that you're using within the organization, but a need to have different segmented tools because what one aspect of the organization needs to know, the other one shouldn't know or shouldn't have access to. So thinking about building those layers like that is really important. And then let's see. Then the other thing we talked about is credibility and accuracy. And how do we know, and the need for transparency in the tools and in how they're being developed and used. And at the end of the day, just to remember to train, to educate, to focus on governance and focus on what we already know and use that as a reasoning jumping off point to figure out what we don't yet know.